end-of-life options and thinking about death, talking about death, should not be limited to a healthcare setting or even a spiritual setting, that it should be very broad and expansive. And so we want to embrace culture and art, but we try fundamentally to respect people's autonomy, and that respect should span living and dying.
Hello, and welcome back to the Completed Life Initiative's Indigenous End-of-Life Symposium. In this symposium, we've been contemplating the question, how do we elevate and amplify Indigenous and Aboriginal end-of-life experiences from around the world?
Your presence in this virtual space means a lot to us, and we're grateful for you tuning in today. Be sure to stay till the end of this presentation, as there will be an opportunity for you to join one of our speakers and your fellow symposium attendees at this community talking event.
In this session, we are especially grateful to be sharing the wisdom of a few individuals who are themselves Indigenous to the United States, specifically the Santa Clara Pueblo Nation of New Mexico, Native Hawaiian and La'au Hawaiian healing communities, and the Tohono O'odham Nation of the Sonoran Desert, located in parts of Mexico and Arizona.
Our speakers, Poem Swentzell, Keoki Baclayon, Hannah Throssell, and Poki'i Balaz, will share their individual experiences around traditional ritual dying practices and end-of-life healthcare decision-making.
In this third session, our speakers will reflect on Indigenous ways of understanding death and dying and examine the role of hospice in Native American healthcare. Together, our speakers will contemplate the challenge of balancing Western medical practices with specific Indigenous modes of thought and ritual dying practice.
Thanks for joining.
Aloha kako. Welcome everyone to our End of Life Symposium, Indigenous to the U.S. session. Mahalo to Completed Life for hosting this symposium, and a special thank you to Sarah and Ali for all your dedication in bringing us all together to share our mana'o or thoughts and ike or knowledge on this important issue. Before I introduce myself, I would like to welcome our three panelists, Hannah, Poem, and Keoki. Aloha to each of you and welcome. Let's start by each of you introducing yourselves. Hannah?
Skugdash, Anin Abjaki Throssell, Dunstone Autumn, Chugakuk Jukjin Amjad. Yat Hannah Throssell Unishia, Maidish Gija Nishla, Kekija Bushishchin, Ya Ani Dashache, Kekija Dashanula. My name is Hannah Throssell. I'm an enrolled member of the Thana Autumn Nation in the most southern part of present-day Arizona. I'm currently a graduate student at Columbia University getting my master's in social work. My son and I just moved back to Arizona from New York City. In the past, I primarily did cancer research working with 7 Arizona and New Mexico tribes, which were focused on collaborative research regarding cancer prevention, as well as end-of-life care for Southwest American Indians. And it really propelled me to wanting to enter social work. I was also a caretaker for my grandmother from about 2015 until her passing in 2020. Aside from that, I also saw the disparities that were occurring with the COVID pandemic on the Navajo Nation, as well as the Thanato Nation. It very much did hit the Navajo Nation very hard, though. And so understanding the health disparities that presently exist for American Indians here in the Southwest, as well as other Indigenous groups, wanting to bring light and attention to it. Have a lot of work within environmental activism, specifically as it pertains to mining in Canton, the Navajo Nation, feeling a tie and wanting to advocate very hard for people to have clean drinking water, as well as oncoming conditions of climate change, and wanting to ensure that our people and my son are able to exist on this planet in a healthy way and learn our traditions and carry on and become an elder. And so that's what I come with this knowledge and these experiences, and hope to share with you all. Thank you.
Hello, Sanket Hamo. My name is Poem Swentzell. I'm from Santa Clara, Pueblo, which is located in northern New Mexico. I have been a massage therapist for the last 32 years. I worked in different type of settings from chiropractic offices, acupuncture offices, cancer center for 10 years, and running my own practice. For the last 10 years, I went back to graduate school and I've been a hospice social worker for the last 10 years. Currently I'm kind of skirting both worlds. Um, I focus on being present for people at the end of their lives, and with my massage work, I'm I'm emphasizing doing body work to folks who normally would not have access to it, whether it's for financial reasons or physical access. I go to people's homes who cannot travel to an office. I work at the Santa Clara Senior Center, working on my seniors there. Um, and I I find the work incredibly humbling, and I'm very grateful I get to do what I do.
Aloha kākou, o wau o Keoki ki ka hapai Baclayon no Kauai mai au. Hauali wau no ke manawa huipu me oko mahalo nui. So very grateful to be here. My name is Keoki ki ka hapai. I'm from the island of Kauai, here in the Hawaiian Islands. I work at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, at the Center for Hawaiian Studies called Kamakakua Kalani Center for Hawaiian Studies. So I teach traditional medicine here in the UH system. Additionally, I work as a cultural health practitioner at Waimanalo Health Center, where we integrate traditional medicine with allopathic medicine and give our patients an opportunity to have a little bit of both worlds there. I um, I am a practitioner of La'au Lapa'au. I run or I am the kahu for two halau or two groups, traditional groups, Halau Lapa'au o Waitata and Pa Pa o Pa Lapa'au o Ohakea. And in these halau or these groups, we practice and we learn our traditional ways in regards to healing. So thank you for having me.
Aloha, everyone. So just a little bit more about me. My name is Dr. Poki'i Balaz. I am a Western trained geriatric doctor with a focus on brain health and those with Alzheimer's and dementia. My background is that I'm also a caregiver to my father for the last 15 years, who's in the end stage of dementia, as well as my nephew who's autistic. Currently, I am very excited to say and happy that I am a haumana or student of Kahu Keoki in La'au. I also serve as the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Center for Innovation, a clinician in a memory care clinic at an FQHC in Hawaii, and my work also crosses over into public policy advocacy focused on system change within our long-term care systems, Alzheimer's and caregivers, community, Indigenous health, and supporting underserved populations, walking gently between the two worlds. Thank you. So let's start off with each of you sharing traditional practices regarding death and dying. Whoever would like to start, may start.
I'm gonna let my elders go first.
Oh dear, I think I'm the one with the most gray hair on the screen. I was worried about that. Well, there's a little bit that I want to say about this. And first off, I want to say that while I was in graduate school, I interviewed a lot of my fellow Indigenous students about what they knew about their tribe's ancestral ways of handling death and dying, and what are their current practices today. I was surprised to hear how extreme the differences are. I continued my research with historical trauma and the drastic differences that have occurred because of telescoping changes that have happened to our indigenous communities in the United States in the last 175 years. I then started looking closely at my own pueblo, Santa Clara Pueblo. Traditionally, cremation was a common practice. Old Lady Fire was considered an ancient deity. Bodies were also buried in middens or ash piles, and ash piles did not have the same connotation for our ancestors as others might have due to this connection with Old Lady Fire. And there is evidence of this practice in Mesa Verde, an ancient ancestral Pueblo village in the Four Corners of the southwestern United States. People were also buried in the floors of living areas. One of my aunts lives in the same house that my great-great-grandmother, Jiahun, lived in the Pueblo. And Jiahun is buried under the floor. And when my grandmother died, she was cremated and put into the same floor. My aunt requests the same ceremony after she dies. By having our ancestors literally underfoot, we think of them and know they are there. There is a practice of taking a pinch of food at meals and giving it to the spirits. This is a symbolic way of feeding those who have died, and it honors our ancestors and those who are buried under our floors in our houses. And my elders taught me that when a person or anything dies, it is transformed into the Powaha, water, wind, breath. And Powaha is present all around us and can be seen in the movement in water, smoke, clouds. It is here now where we live, daily. And with this belief, we are living with our ancestors at all times, and they are present with us.
Mahalo poem. Anna, Keoki?
Hi. I want to thank Poem for describing some of those beautiful traditions that we don't hear about often. And it's really beautiful. There's some similarities of really honoring the deceased, honoring the loved one in life who then becomes our ancestor, and in the ways we honor them definitely show our deference for life, and in that, as much as they were a part of us in life, they become a part of us and the world around us in the time after. In our tradition, for Hawaiian culture, the when a person is preparing to pass away, and this is really this is the traditional knowledge of our people, excluding Christianity. But today we have a mixture of those traditional practices and Christianity, and other religious and theological, philosophical belief systems. But the underlying Hawaiian belief system tells us that when a person is preparing to pass away, they're preparing to walk to Kalena Ka'uhane. It's the name of a leaping off place of souls of the person that is going to be passing away. So with that in mind, they keep in mind Kalena Ka'uhane. This is translated in as Kalena, the leaping off point, Aka'uhane, of the spirit. Here it said that there stands a branching tree which serves as a roadway for the soul. If the soul's guardian or its ancestral guardian spirit is present during that time when they're transitioning, that guardian spirit will protect and shelter it on the way as they travel to the spiritual realm. One of the places, it's kind of like a a holding place, so to speak. We call it a pu'uku akahi. It's or the hill that stands alone, and this was the name of the hill where the spirit of people would tarry, and they would remain there as a place for them to make reconciliation with their family guardians before they moved on to Kalena Akauhane, before they went to the Lena and to the leaping off point to join their ancestors in the spirit world. There are different names of trees that are trees are among the honored entities of our culture, trees, plants. And so in our belief system, there are trees that stand there as a demarcation point, as a leaping off point, to let us know that we're about to take that step into the spirit world. And so the names, I want to give honor to the names of those trees in recognition of our knowledge of the spirit world, and from whom this knowledge comes from. It's from our ancestors. The names of those trees are Ulu Leivalo, Ulu La'i o Walu, and Ulu o Leiwalo. So these are the trees which stand near the roadway of the soul. Some of the practices of the dying among our people is also to help them prepare to pass away, right? So the dying person needs to have privacy, either alone or with the ohana, or with the family, as we say. And they would meet with the spiritual leader or the spiritual healer, and we normally call them kahu or kahuna. So this private time that they have in preparation to dying, this private time with the healer becomes a teaching opportunity for them to review and get to hear of the ceremonies and the rituals that will be performed on their behalf. And I think for some of many of our indigenous cultures, follow that, but it's to remind the person that is passing away that these are the rituals that we're doing, and this is why. So it's a teaching opportunity. So this is for us believed to like aid the person's na'au, their heart, in being prepared to hear about things such as the love of their akua, their god, their aumakua, their guardian spirits, helps them to understand that they are going to become a part of the universe, and that their spirit is going to continue on into the spirit world or the spirit realm to be with the ancestors, and that the transition of their uhane, their spirit, from the physical world to the spirit world is a journey in itself. So when I think an important part of this is, while the person is in the process of dying, one of the things that we do is we encourage them to move on, that it is okay, that the acceptance of this passing is a part of the journey and is part of the transition. So we would speak to them, Maka'olelo Hawaii in Hawaiian, we would use terms of mai hopo hopo, don't worry. Uh, you know, my point, don't forget us. Akana e pono e ho'o mau. Just continue on. Ho'o mau, ho'o mau, ho'o mau. Continue. Continue in the journey. Embrace it. And this, by preparing their mindset prior to them, prior to their passing, preparing their mindset is pivotal, because we don't want them to have attachments in this life. We want them to release and let go. Um, in our teachings, attachments lead to suffering. So if there are negative attachments to this life, then that person will have have difficulty in accepting and embracing the spiritual realm, because they're seeking out the physical. So the spiritual healer offers words of support, but the healer also comes prepared to ho'olohe, to listen to the dying person's mo'olelo of life, listens to their dreams, their visions, their fears, their regrets, guilt, maybe that they've had in life, but as well as, sitting there to listen to their happy times in their life. So a very important segue, as it were. So it's imperative to allow their mind to be cleared of negativity, in a way that allows them to pass on with grace. So we do this a lot through conversation. Kamba I lio ke kahi I ke kahi. Talking one with another. Alo ahe alo, face to face. And this is also done through the encouragement of pule, prayer, pikai, purification ceremony, and oli, chanting. So those are a few things that we talk about, and I just wanted to open with that. Mahalo.
Thank you, Keoki. Very much appreciate you sharing all of that wonderful and beautiful information. I'd like to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing your people's customs and traditions. It's very beautiful to hear. So I come from two tribes, so I suppose I'll start first with the autumn traditions. Um, so typically, I believe within our culture, let me see, I think I have a maybe it'll be best if I use my tattoo to kind of explain it. Um, so here's Itoi, which is our creator, and he goes through this maze of life. Obviously, we all plan to come back to the end of the life, but maybe things happen along the way. Maybe you pass at different various points. But I think it's a very beautiful thing to know that we have this symbol within our culture, also kind of knowing that we're on this consistent journey and at any point it can end. But when it does end, we'll come back to be with our creator. And so in that way, I think it's a way of them knowing that life is also we're only here for a short period of time. And we're able to learn and to give and to be in community we can, when we can. And elders within our community are very much celebrated along with youth. But once someone is ending towards the near end of their life, it's always discussed. And I think even within our culture, funerals often tend to be gathering points for long lost family, and people will come and make pilgrimage from very far away to come and celebrate the end of one's life. And there's usually, I think now typically do call it a wake, but we still would come and celebrate the body and of course adorn the body and um ceremonial clothes, and we wear shells. Even though the beach is fairly far away from our community, we harvest shells. We go down to Mexico and I guess present day California and gather these shells. And it's not when we wear them, you can hear them and it's calling to our ancestors. And so when somebody passes on to the next life, the community gathers and there'll be runners that run and carry on that spirit to make sure that they're able to make their way and clear the path for them. And traditionally, cremation was done, but I think now it's shifted more into burials. But now things have definitely changed since colonization has impacted our community. O'odham culture and traditions are very much, to call it, Sonoran Catholicism. So it's a blend of our indigenous practices with Catholicism that was brought by the Spanish. Um, and so that's done, but it's a time of song and celebration, and there's usually a feast afterwards when somebody passes, um and although those times are very sorrowful, I feel that there's always laughter within our community halls, and to hear the traditional songs, it's always beautiful. So I'd say it's more so of a celebration of life when an autumn person passes, if they were, well loved and connected to their community, if you were so fortunate enough. Um, yeah, but in Diné traditions, I'd say death is very taboo. It's not something that's spoken about often, because it's thought that if you speak upon death, then you're welcoming it, you're preparing for it. Um, and so even simple things like saying like, "Oh, like I died in a video game and I was upset," I would get reprimanded for that because my grandmother would say, "No, no, we don't speak death in this house. We do not want to welcome it." And I'd be so confused. I'd be like, "What? Should I say you pretended to die?" I'd be like, "Okay." But in that way, I guess it's thought that when you speak certain things out into the world or into creation, that it's welcoming that energy within our lives. But as a young person, when my cousins and I would be playing around our homestead, I remember coming upon like hogans, which are traditional dwellings our families lived in within the area. And I'd say, "Oh, whose hogan is this?" I say, "We don't go in there. So and so passed in that home. And when they passed, we left. They're buried there, but we left." And I'd be like, "Oh, okay." So it was always a lot of confusion. I was very confused. And then when my grandmother died, that's when I really was exposed to what the night traditions were truly like, which is very intense. We go 3 days without bathing. We don't even cut our hair. You don't cut your fingernails. There's certain things you can't do, like you can't kill any living thing. And so, like traditionally during these end of death ceremonies, we would have a feast, but us as the families wouldn't be able to prepare those things because we'd be touching like animal carcasses that we'd be eating. So things like even butchering a sheep you couldn't do, so even small things like killing a fly you weren't able to partake in. And again, it's also thought of, I guess, some of the things Keoki shared was we want to make sure that the spirit is able to pass on to the next world and ensure that there's no attachments. And so for 3 days, the family is allowed to mourn very deeply, which is a lot of crying, of course, talking story about the person and the things you shared with them. Um, and it's thought that the spirit themselves are somewhat in this in-between world, not quite yet. They're still somewhat attached to the physical world, and the spirit world is there, but they're somewhere in the middle trying to make their way. And when you're preparing them for the funeral, you adorn them in very beautiful clothes that they probably wouldn't even have been able to have when they were living or afford, but the family pulls it all together. They make sure that they're sent on their way with beautiful velvet, turquoise, blankets to keep them warm, things that they might need along the way, whatever they partook in, maybe they was tobacco, whatever they need as they make that journey. And then once the 3 days is over, the family themselves can wash their hair and cleanse. And it's kind of to be a release for that spirit. Once that spirit knows the 3 days is gone, then they can make their way onto the next world. And it's you're not supposed to. It's more in that person that passed, because then you're still kind of bringing that attachment.
Mhm.
But we all recognize that's very hard to do. I think especially I mean, for me, growing up, very close to the Western world, and I miss my grandma. I miss my cousins. I miss them. And so I suppose maybe we're supposed to keep those things to ourselves, but that's something I try to advocate for when I notice other people that go through this mourning experience, especially a Dano one. It's very, very intense. And we should talk about it, talk about that person and remember them. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you to all three of you for sharing that. Some of you spoke about, helping them along the way. making sure that the ohani or the spirits are passing, but also spoke about this, and all three of you mentioned now this integration with Western concepts or Catholicism, and so I guess the next question is, you have all described such beautifully how each of your cultures view death and dying, the practices that are associated with it, and how do you now feel it has changed or merged, or how do you see that it has come together with Western practices? Do you see this as something that will continue, as something that's good, maybe not good or challenging? And how has the culture evolved with Western practices?
Oh, I want to thank both Hannah and Keoki for their beautiful sharing and their stories. Thank you. Um, and within Santa Clara Pueblo, like Hannah was saying, that what happened in in 1540 when the Spanish came into the Southwest, there was a tremendous break and shift. It was a rather traumatic experience. Even though we've had since the end of the 1500s to today to try to recalibrate and refigure who and where we are, there's still there, there's still confusion. Um, um, when I talk about, when I've asked elders about specific things that we do, for example, some people feel they have to put a blanket over a mirror, and I say, well, how long has that happened? Because we've not always had mirrors. And people shrug their shoulders. And then when I was doing hospice social work, I found out that that's actually a Jewish tradition of covering a mirror. We'll we will have the four days of a after a person dies. And not everybody does that. My brother, that ceremony happened for him. My mom absolutely did not want that ceremony. Um, and so what I feel has happened is, the Pueblo has had to figure out how, what 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 are our customs. And anthropologists like to talk about the compartmentalization of indigenous people. And they don't understand, how can you go to a, a Catholic church or a Baptist mission or anything like that, and then you go to the kiva, our ceremonial house, and you perform the ceremonies there. They think we compartmentalize ourselves here and then here. I learned from my grandmother, someone who deeply believed in traditional Pueblo philosophies, and was also the wife of the very first Pueblo Baptist minister. And she sat in the front pew every Sunday morning for sermons, that all religions have their value and can be combined. And one way of praying and honoring the spirits does not have more value than another, and that a person can do both without compromising their spirit or soul. Prayer is prayer. And as my mother would say, we are not a fallen people. So therefore, there is no belief in our traditional philosophy of purgatory or hell. And that it's that very interesting thing that I see happening in Santa Clara Pueblo, where you have very old traditional things, like insisting on burying your loved one in your kitchen floor. Whereas with the tribal council saying, no, everyone needs to be buried in the Catholic cemetery. And well, that doesn't always happen. So there is conflict, and it comes then down to each person. I think in the Pueblo, what I've observed is what they are going to follow and what makes sense to them.
Thank you, Poem. And right before moving on to the two other panelists, I definitely can relate to what you're saying, as I think many of us walk in two worlds and try to put them together, a duality that we all share. And to your point about Catholicism or Christianity, and I grew up very much like that. We go to church, but then we still practice traditional ways. And it was interesting. It was hard for some to understand, and then for others, not so much. But I so love the way that you explained it. That was such a great way, and the value that you added. And so I'd love to turn it over now to Hannah and Keoki to hear from either of you, both of you.
Okay. I thank you, Poem, for sharing. Um, the 1500s were a very difficult time for your people, and the integration of Western ideas and even religions into Hawaii, we experienced the same among our people. As new teachings and beliefs were introduced, there started to be a division on how we should practice or be Hawaiian, and that created a lot of conflict, oftentimes within the individual families that made up all of our islands. So I can imagine similar conversations probably happened within your own people for both of you. Now, in today's time, we ask ourselves, what do we do when we have the traditions? If the person passing away wants to be buried a particular way, more probably maybe more the traditional way, or follow the uh, the rites and religious practices of the religion that they belong to, or maybe a third, a combination of both, from what Poem was kind of alluding to. And I think that whole integration part really has to come down to communication with the dying. What do they want? How do they see their funeral? How do they see their families interacting and their cousins and their friends? Um, and with that in mind, the we respect and honor the uh, the dying. We're not dictating what ceremonies should be done, um, unless they wanted the ceremonies to be done, or what religious rites should be done unless they wanted those religious rites to be done on their behalf. And that is, yeah, I think, an important aspect of this whole process, not just for the person that is passing away, but also for the living, for us who are going to survive them, because it'll set the precedence on how we are going to be treating our future loved ones that will be passing away, and then even for ourselves as we progress to that point. And so a lot of storytelling and sharing is going to help bring about an equilibrium of what the balance should be between what uh, what traditions we want to be had on behalf of our loved one. Um, there is old traditional practice of ours where, and Hannah reminded me of this when she was talking about the one side of your family where you can't cry, or you can't show emotions so much. Um, and for us, there was no sound of any kind of wailing that was made until the body was cleaned and dressed for the spirit of the person. Um, if the cleaning wasn't done, if the body wasn't dressed, then the spirit, the person would still linger in the house after they passed away. So, which made it kind of an interesting situation. Well, what happens if the spirit, what happens if our loved one passes away in the hospital or and not in the home? What happens if they pass away in a care home and not at home? Um, so, um, whereas wailing and crying was a signal for for us to grieve, um, wailing and crying probably wouldn't be appropriate in certain settings, or like the hospital where you have other patient rooms nearby. Um, so in our traditional culture, this really deep wailing and loud wailing would would be seen as interrupting other guests in the hospital. So for us, it was imperative to wail after the body was cleaned and dressed, and it was only after then um, that that loud wailing could happen. Um, and so talking over with your loved one that is passing, and then even with the hospital staff who may not be Indigenous or Native, to let them know, hey, this is how we view our how we honor our passing relative, um, and if you would don't mind, this is probably going to happen. So giving them a heads up of this is what we this is what we do. This is we're probably going to be chanting, and everyone is going to be able to hear it all down the floor. And this is something that I hope it doesn't alarm you or disrupt you, but it's out of respect that I'm sharing this with you. And so I think the if the stage of passing away occurs at a hospital, there's just more communication that has to happen with the people involved there, and a balance can be struck, as far as like what is what can be done, in the best way possible to honor our loved ones.
Mahalo, Keoki. And just thank you so much for sharing all of that, especially talking about when we're in hospitals and in those settings that sometimes can be difficult to have those conversations. And but that was such a poignant point to bring up for us to consider as we all move forward. So Hannah?
I think one thing that Indigenous people now are kind of reckoning with is that the Western world and our traditions have merged. As much as we might resist and still try to remember the ways that were passed down to us, we live in this colonized world. I think we're still going through active colonization, which has even trickled down into how people pass away. Um, I'm particularly drawn to the process of like embalming a body, which was pretty foreign to my people, and I imagine many other Indigenous people for quite some time. And I remember my grandmother being when she was getting ready to pass, was telling me that I don't want them to go into my body and take out, organs and the fluids. I think I'd rather would just be cremated. And that made a lot of sense to me in a way, and I felt that was a way of her wanting to preserve what form of traditions our people carried on. Um, and I even look into folks that pass away and like rural reservations and like how my family, even when we've had family that passed, like our family would transport the body to and from where it needed to go versus reliance on, I think the term is an undertaker. I think that's the correct term for the people that come and take the bodies.
Yeah.
And I even look at these terms and how the intention that they carry. It's so I think Western culture also makes death very much like it's a very intense thing, and not to say it's not, but I think our families wanting to always be involved. And traditionally, we would prepare the body and having to pass that on now to like morticians and such like that. And it being involved with the church. And I'm being reminded, Poem, when you were saying that, you know, um, our people have been what's the word? Compartmentalized.
Compartmentalized. Yeah.
Compartmentalized, yeah. Um, wanting to do things at the church, and then we'll go home and do ceremony our way. When you spoke to that, that really reminded me. I said, oh wow, we do very much conduct ourselves and living within these two worlds. And I wonder for how long, our people are going to do that. And I know at least now, presently, at least both of my tribes and nations are working to try to bring back our traditions. But it is incredibly difficult, but not impossible.
I agree with you, Hannah, that it's not entirely impossible. And so to stick with that subject, how do each of you imagine that cultural practices can become again the norm within the context that we're all living in? And Hannah, I don't know if you'd like to.
Sure. I just have a quick thought before it flees. I think now would probably be the best time to learn from our elders while they're still here. And to learn how to reintegrate those ceremonies, especially us younger people who've, maybe we've gone to school and we've learned these concepts of like colonization, bringing these terms back to our communities, whereas, maybe somebody like my grandpa would just be like, what are you talking about? Oh, you mean how you've been trying to be white? That's probably what he would say. um and so I think that takes us, younger people to really want to hold space and seek out that knowledge. And I think it entails a lot of us to be within our communities. And I know learning these traditions, it's not like you can go to school to learn these things. You have to exist with your community and, be in a community with your elders, which isn't going to mean they're going to be telling you, you need to do this and you need to do that. It's more so probably going to be, you're just going to be observing and fetching them coffee and running other errands and things that they need. But you do gain that knowledge and coming to it with a certain amount of intention. But again, also some of our folks have transitioned into Christianity and Catholicism, and wanting to be respectful of those teachings that have been passed on to us, whether good or bad.
Mahalo, Hannah. Keoki or Paul?
Yeah, to answer the question, how can cultural practices become the norm? I think every practice that we practice as Native people need to be practiced, even among the, as we say, haole, even among the foreigners. So include them in the practices also. As part of my work, teaching here at the university, I teach traditional medicine, and those that come to the class, a lot of them are Native Hawaiian, but there are also many that aren't. Just recently, I taught them the Pikai ceremony, which is the purification ceremony, and the pule, or the prayer, goes like this. Ho mai ka ia mamuli o ka mana I haewi ia mai ia'u e kua e nā kupuna e nā o mako a palo aku. Ho mai ka ia au ia oe mai ka piko I luna, a hiki I ka piko I lalo, mai nā kihi e hao ke kino, a nā kapua'i, a mama ua noa. And so that is a prayer saying, I bless you from your piko, from the point of, or opening point of your head, which is open to the spiritual realm, a ka piko I lalo, to your belly button, which is your connection to your mother and the physical ancestral generations that go back. Mai nā kihi e hao ke kino, from the four corners of the body, where in between these 4 points, all the vitals are. A nā kapua'i, to the soles of the feet. And so I in teaching that purification ceremony, not just to the Native Hawaiians, I made sure that the Native Hawaiians understood this is your people, this is your practice, this is your place, this is how you do it. These are the words. I'm an example. Follow me. Do this at home. And for the haole, for the foreigner, for the Caucasian, or for anybody else that wasn't Native Hawaiian, it was an opportunity for them to say, I've heard a Native person say this. This is how it's done. This is these are the words that are used. Now I can share it too, or I can be familiar with it whenever I go into a Native setting.
Mm.
I will not be afraid to participate. So it falls on us as Native people, not just to educate our Native people, our Native generation, but it's also to educate the foreigner. They need to know of the practices also, and sometimes that takes a little bit of of really letting go our animosity toward the history that we've been dealt, and understand that that haole, or that individual, that foreigner in front of us, wasn't that person that invaded us in the 1500s, right? Or invaded us during the or overthrew the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. It wasn't that individual. This is another person from another generation, another time, who needs to know and needs to learn of our ways. So to answer the question, how can cultural practices become the norm? Um, the I think the general definition of what is norm, what is a norm, or what is normal, is that which a society acts and does, and accepts as proper behavior. Uh, and so we as a society, in a mixed society of natives and non-natives, have to make it the norm. We have to make it an acceptable practice to pikai, to do our purification ceremonies. So it's not a weird thing anymore. It's like, oh, they're doing pikai ceremony, right? And you can honor it, and you can sit by on the side, and you can watch, or you can participate. And so making it the norm is important, lies upon us as the practitioners, um, to speak it out, to teach it, to be an example for it, but also to allow people to become the teacher, to become the example, to become the the individuals that help us to make it the norm again. And this is despite whatever kind of differences there are. It's just, yeah, we have to do total immersion, basically immerse other people into our cultures and our practices. Yeah. Mahalo. Thank you.
Thank you, T. Very beautiful. Can see why I'm his student. You see.
Very lucky.
Thank you. And Paul, I would really love to hear what your thoughts on this also.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to say, Keoki and Hana, it is wonderful listening to the two of you. Thank you. While you were speaking, Keoki, you're thank you for sharing that incredible ceremony. You mentioned belly button, and it reminded me in the 19 pueblos in New Mexico, there are belly buttons in each village, and it's like the one in Santa Clara, the Nuxipu. Um, it's just based, we have this center plaza, and there's just this kind of stone over there, and that's our sacred belly button. That's the center of the earth. That's where we came out of, from the earth. I remember as a little child, when the ceremonies and dances were happening, like, you felt like if you could stand on the stones, you could see it over heads in front of you. I mean, you're not supposed to stand on the belly button, but that's what happened. Yeah, in terms of also I wanted to say a little more about the hospitals before I talk about this cultural piece, because I do think it's really important, and I think it is connected with the hospitals as well. And I wanted to share a story. I was recently talking to a retired nurse who's on hospice, and she told me about her first experience she had with a Pueblo person's death at the nursing home where she worked. And she knew that this woman was actively dying, and the staff was going in and out of her room as they had time to check on her. After a little while, the aide came to her and said the woman was gone. And, the nurse assumed the aide was saying the woman died and started to walk to this woman's room. The aide said again that the woman was gone, literally gone. The nurse entered the room, and there was no body there. And the aide said that another patient observed that the woman's husband had come into the room, picked up her body, and walked out. The nurse frantically, she said, called her supervisor in the middle of the night and explained what had happened, worrying about all the legal issues for the facility and for herself. And the supervisor nonchalantly told this nurse that happens with Pueblo people who want to honor their traditions. The nurse told me she wished she knew this would be the case. So, just to emphasize the fact that we do need to share information. We do need to educate people. Um, and going back to the initial question of culture, again, I'm always looking at Santa Clara, wondering, what has changed since the 1500s. I mean, it's there. A lot has happened, and so the way I wrap my mind around this has actually been helped along by a book by Ari Kelman on, it's called Misplaced Massacre, on the Sand Creek Massacre, and how they, the whole way that they were able to create a site for this historic massacre that happened in Colorado. And basically what happened was the descendants of those who survived this massacre, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho, they knew that the massacre happened on the specific turn of the river. The anthropologists kept finding, the teepee rings here, the fire rings here, shell casings, all the signs of the battle over here in a field. And finally, they realized what happened was the course of the river actually changed. You know how rivers meander. And as I've pondered, this thing, I keep thinking perhaps culture is like a river, and there's this essence that flows through our indigenous cultures, and it doesn't matter where it ends up on the land. It's still moving, it's still flowing. So in terms of trying to find what is it that we can do that's still culturally appropriate, it is going to shift with time and in changing landscapes. But so long as, like, you you two incredible people here, I'm seeing your little faces in the squares. It's like, so long as we have these young people like you who are still breathing in and the words I would use, the Bo'aha, that river is going to keep flowing. And when we become too stuck on those specifics, we might miss some really important aspects that might be truer and more meaningful and important than, you know, how you beat that drum.
Mhm.
Just beautiful. I'm just always amazed at what all three of you have to share. It's just, I don't know, just wonderful to hear. Paul, you were ending on this river that keeps flowing, and Hannah, you had brought up listening to the elders. We're speaking about elders in your earlier response, and Keoki, you know, this teaching of our people and those who are not native or not indigenous. And so it also makes me as think about what role, as we look at our two bookends, the youth and our elders or kupuna, how does that role play and how does that intergenerational download or knowledge play into this discussion of, you know, our cultural practices in death and dying and continuing those practices, or as the river continues to flow? And so what are your thoughts around how we, you know, we bring these two bookends together and how that helps to develop and continue our cultural practices?
So, at least in my community, I'm finding that we're losing a lot of young people, whether it's to suicide or substance use or other types of accidents. Um, and it's very disheartening, you know, when I hear this and often know some of these people I grew up with that are having a very hard time in the post-colonial society, maybe active colonization, whatever it be. And when we prepare for their death ceremonies, we still incorporate as much of the traditional aspects as we can. I know I lost my cousin to suicide when he was 19. And despite this, our Dina family still had a very intense 3-day ceremony for him so that he could pass on to the next life. And I know one thing my grandparents often emphasized was that death by our own hands wasn't something that our people had. It wasn't very common as it is now, especially with younger folks. And I myself have been a teacher and taught youth. And I think sometimes when we think of death, we always think of center our elders, which yes, they do pass, and we know they're getting towards the end of the journey. Um, and now myself having been a mother and being in community with other women, hearing more stories of stillbirths, or children that choose to pass on or pass through to other causes earlier. And I think being reminded by how much death it's a part of life, and it's inevitable for all of us. And coming in with that, you know, being thankful every day for being able to wake up and experience this life. It's a blessing as hard as things are. But when I think about, you know, our ceremonies are very much rituals to prepare us for the next world. And I think that's something many Indigenous cultures have, is we know that there's another experience for us, whether it's to go and be with our ancestors or creator, or maybe prepare for another life, should our cultures believe in reincarnation. Um, and so I approach it very much with, you know, it's just very thankful to be here every day, and thankful that the people that I love the most are here every day, and appreciative for the time we have now, and, you know, the elders and the community and the young ones, and um, the middle-aged adults. I feel like we often forget them so much, even though they're very much our knowledge keepers, and they're the matriarchs of our, at least of my culture. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Hannah, very much. And just Keoki or Pong, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I very much uh I very much look forward to talking to the youth of this generation, when I say youth of this generation, I'm talking about the Keiki children, Opio teenagers, and Makua, our young parents. So Hannah, I mean, you mentioned that not forgetting the young parent age. So talking about our those in their 20s and early 30s, um, and those in the early 40s, are young parents. So that generation of youth, including all those categories, are an important and integral uh, piece of the longevity of our culture, a very important population. And our elders are unfortunately are passing away earlier due to diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, chronic illness from smoking, alcohol abuse, drugs, and their social involvements with hanging out with the wrong crowd, gangs. These are things that didn't exist in our traditional societies, but nevertheless, we are here facing them now together. Um, so, Poki'i, your question about the um, intergenerational um, communication that needs to happen between youth and elders. This is this is pretty challenging because of the situation that also our youth, Keiki, Opio, and Makua, our children, teenagers, and young adults, they too are also suffering from diabetes and smoking and passing away early, having these early onset of illnesses, which interfere with us being able to pass on our traditions, which interfere um, with us being fully present in the learning and the transaction of our ceremonies with each other during those times of passing or even times of birth and other ceremonies that happen in the phases of an individual's life. In our tradition, exactly 1 year or on the anniversary of death, there's always a feast for the person that passed away. And there's a prayer that is always said, and these specific words, "O ke aka o ke akua o ka i'o ko mako." And this is recited and over again over the feast. "O ke aka o ke akua o ka i'o ko mako. O ke aka o ke akua o ka i'o ko mako." And this is recited saying, the substance here of the food at this feast is ours, and the essence of it is yours for the one who passed away. And if we can't be able to recite these words in the presence of the youth, of the children, of the young parents, if we can't recite these words in the presence of the elders that are there, then we're not reaching our goal of making this the norm. We're not reaching our goal of giving our cultural practices longevity. We're not reaching our goal in making sure that this continues on in perpetuity, and the connection of youth and elders are such a vital and important aspect of our cultural ways of life as natives. And if I think wherever we stand, and I know Poem and Hannah, you are strong women of your culture. Um, no matter who we have within our influence of within our circles of influence, we should empower them. We should teach them, encourage them to speak our ways, to live our ways. So there is always a burning light left behind. So, yeah, thank you.
Yes. yes to Hannah and Keoki. I, while listening, I was thinking about that import. While I was listening to the two of you talk, I was thinking about the importance of, direct lineage of passing that information down. And I was thinking of one of the big breaks that happened in Santa Clara in the with the influenza epidemic. And for some reason, so you're looking about the early 1918, 1920, you're looking at this huge chunk of those middle-aged parent people who died. For some reason in the Pueblo, it didn't take the elders or the children, it took the parents. And so in my family, for example, both my grandparents were orphaned, and my grandma was lucky enough that she and her brother were adopted and taken in by their maternal grandma, Jiahun, who's in the kitchen floor. And my grandpa and all his siblings didn't have anyone to take them in. So he was one of those people who was then in and out of boarding schools and all of this. But what I've noticed then is like my grandma was able to get some of the information, but when you're a strong young mama parent, you're going to be teaching the discipline, you're going to be teaching the rules, you're going to be teaching how you're going to behave. As a grandma, you're going to be going, oh, okay, you can have a popsicle for breakfast. It's like, so it's like there is something that happens. And so that direct lineage of information really is important. One thing that I do notice about how information can or can't be shared is the level of secrecy. And I know that it's been built into the Pueblo traditional ways. There are different moieties and clans, and so information stays within there. But it goes back to what you were saying, Keoki. It's like all of us need a little bit of the information so that we know what's going on. And I'm really not answering your question about that bookmarking of intergenerational information. I know that with my elders, my aunts and uncles, and the seniors that I work with in the Pueblo, they will share information, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for like any nugget I get, even if it's from my uncle, a name of that mountain or the name of that valley. It's like you just see the world in a different way with that. And I also wanted to comment on the feeding. Feeding is so important. Yes, we feed our elder spirits, but another thing that and I could be kicked out of the Pueblo for saying this, but I think that we do this every October, end of October. We do a huge ceremony feeding the dead, and the family gathers. You cook all the food that your deceased loved ones enjoyed, or go to Kentucky Fried Chicken if that's what your father's favorite food was, whatever. And there's this whole ceremony around it, and then you go out and a little bit of everything that's been brought in is put into a bowl. It's the ceremony is done, and the ancestors are fed. again, that's so much like what's coming up from Mexico, the Day of the Dead
Mhm.
do. And, I've tried time and time again asking my elders, was this coming from the Spanish or was this something that we always did? Because I know we do that constant feeding thing. And again, there's this shrugging of the shoulders. And again, back to that melding of what has happened over the last, how many years has it been? 500-600 years. We just do it because it does mean something to us. It's so wonderful to then sit there at the table with all your family around, eating those favorite foods of your loved ones who have passed, and coming together, joking and laughing about them. As you mentioned, Hannah, the laughter is a big part of memory, and Keoki, as you said, storytelling is a big part of honoring those who have passed.
Just thank you all for sharing that. And sorry to take a minute of time, but this really helps me in my own reflections, especially from what everyone is sharing and has shared. And when I was younger, my paternal grandmother, who I'm named after, she was my first connection to Hawaiian spaces and Hawaiian learning. And my mother and father taught me how to really be in this duality and how to go forward. And as I'm listening and learning, my grandmother passed away too early, and she was doing a lot of the intergenerational stuff with me, and I was learning about our practices and our customs, even in death and dying, and our language. And as you mentioned, they get taken so soon. As Keoki mentioned, a lot of our elders are passing sooner. I also have to stop and say it's nice to be us 30 and 40-year-olds to be mentioned too. Thank you for that. But really going back to it, like I'm preparing at this time for my father, as my father's in the end stage of Alzheimer's, and I've been his caregiver for 15 years now, and we know that the time, and he spoke about that place to leap off, as Keoki shared, and has spoke about it many times. And as I'm preparing for this to happen, and my mother and I have been talking to my father to let him know it's all right, but the attachment between he and my mother is incredibly strong. And so I'm listening and remembering that how all of this is playing into my current life. And this view of, a lot of times when we say talk about the plan is viewed in this Western world of advanced healthcare directives, and please write it down and get it notarized or get it signed. And to the point of what you're all mentioning, my father sat us down a long time ago and let us know what exactly he would like to be done. And my brother will be carrying out the last part of it, but we definitely are, incorporating these cultural practices, and as has been mentioned, preparing his body too, as we give him the last bath. And I worked at a Native Hawaiian institution for long-term care, and I was really surprised that hadn't been part of it. And so as our kupuna passed, we would prepare their body and give the last bath. And as they exited the building, we would all sing Aloha Oi, which is a Hawaiian song. And so, that got incorporated into the daily practice, which, to Keoki's point, was taught to those who were Native Hawaiian and those who were not. And those who were not Native Hawaiian really embraced it, really liked it, and were so happy that they had been included in the practice. And so it really kind of sums it up about how we, can work together and be together. And as I continue for this next phase in my father's passing in my life, it just gives me, I'm so happy that he had that discussion with us, that we talked. And while he's nonverbal, I'm learning about our practices through all of his writings that he left in the many journals that are held up on my bookshelf behind me. And so just how great it is for these generations to come together. Thank you for allowing me to share just some of my thoughts and feelings that are coming to the surface as I'm here in the space with all of you. And as we're continuing this discussion, it brings us to then, what would you describe, or what is a good death?
I think I can share a little bit, even though I'm the youngest. Um, thank you for sharing more about your father, Poki. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, my Che, is also nearing towards the end of his journey. And I moved to New York City last year, and he was holding me, and he was telling me this is probably going to be the last time you see me like this. And and when he said that, I knew exactly what he meant. Even though he speaks like very limited English as well. Um, but right now last time I saw him, he's very confused and kind of getting towards the end. And um, I've always known he was more of a holy man, and so he'll kind of be talking to himself, and I imagine he's talking to like spirits and other things, and so I immediately recognize like, oh, he's talking to other dimensional things, and so I think now it's getting towards the end. Um, but anyways, aside from that, I remember when I took care of my grandmother, she was Pima, she was Akimel O'odham, which is a sister tribe of the Thana O'odham. Speak the same language and the customs are very similar. I'm Desert O'odham and she's River O'odham. Essentially what that means. But she one wanted me to take care of her as I believe I'm her youngest granddaughter. Yes, I'm her youngest granddaughter, and we were the closest and we were best friends, absolutely. We're more so as best friends than grandma and granddaughter. um but she was on dialysis care, and so she was very adamant, said, I don't want the transport to come and take me to dialysis, I want you to take me to dialysis. And I was in college, and I think at the time I was also pregnant, and I just was like, grandma, like, can't you see I'm carrying all of these things? And but despite that, she said, yes, I see that you're carrying all these things, and now you have to carry me until I'm ready to go. Um, which I'm very thankful for. So thankful for, looking back. And at the time, it was very hard. Working with our elderly folks can be very difficult with like language barriers, as well as the things that illness can bring on. Um, but anyways, there were opportunities for her, I suppose, to pass, but I was somewhat resistant to it. Um, I'm thinking of things like advanced directives, and like do not resuscitate and such like that. And it kind of took some time for his social workers would come in and they weren't native, and try to explain like what a do not resuscitate means. And so I had to be very blunt. And because they would be like dancing around, if we don't resuscitate, then you probably won't live. And my grandma would be so confused because she was also hard of hearing. And so eventually I just was like, Grandma, they're asking, are you down to die? 'Cause that's how we talked. And she was like, yes, yes, I'm down. I do not want CPR. I don't want any of that. And I think we had gone through that for maybe about like 2 years, 2 years of her not really quite understanding what they were insinuating.
Mm.
Um, and then towards the end, she had more so of a complication that wasn't going to be able to be reversed through surgery or anything. And so I was with her, and they said, do you want to go on hospice care? And she kind of looked at me, and I said, I think I need to stop making the choices now, Grandma, because I think I'm keeping you here longer than maybe you want to be here. And she said, okay, I want to be on hospice care, and I want to be taken off dialysis. And in that moment I was just like so heartbroken. And I said, okay, this isn't about me. My grandmother's lived this very long life. She's like 79, and she's been here for so long, and I think it's time for me to let her go. And towards the end she said, are you gonna be okay? And I said, yeah, I'm gonna be okay. I'm tearing up thinking about it. But so I think that's a lot of what it is. It's preparing the family for what it means. And I think those hard conversations need to be had
Mhm.
up front versus, letting our loved ones suffer maybe longer than they need to for maybe our sake. And that's something I often reflect on often, and I'm very fortunate to meet with people maybe that are a bit older whose parents are passing and they're going through the same thing. And it's like, you went through that when you were like 22. And I'm like, yeah. So this is what knowledge I can pass on to you. Um, so that's what I'm thinking, very much autonomy based for the person who's getting ready to pass. And much like we shared, being upfront about what traditions we want carried on. And I know it's very difficult for some certain cultures, especially dinner culture, because death is taboo. But maybe shifting from death not being so taboo because it's inevitable for us all, and it's very beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like the way you ended that, Hannah, and your description of how beautiful it is. And I think, um, there's just a different perspective to look on it, death and dying, which can also be, very sad and the grief that comes with it, but how the celebration of life and how beautiful it is. And I resonate with you. And we sometimes wonder, is my father holding on while we're saying the words, to go? And I'm sure my grandmother is here with him to help him. But is the intent inside? Are we really feeling that to let go? Um, but I definitely agree with you. I'm so thankful that he shared what he wanted, and a lot of it involves our cultural practices. And when that time comes, looking forward to carrying out those wishes. So thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
Both Poki and Hannah, my heart is with you as you for you as you've gone through those journeys. I'm sure every one of us has lost somebody we've loved. As a hospice social worker, I've seen both incredibly peaceful and incredible torturous deaths, and I've not noticed that one faith or culture predisposes one kind or the other. But I think that it's so much has been said here about listening to the other person. Um, yes, having those hard discussions, um, letting people make those decisions and finding that place inside ourselves that we know it's okay to say goodbye. I know my mom, she tried to teach me when I was younger, that healing is not the absence of death. And it took me many years to understand that, and I did get to that before she died. And she of her three kids, I'm her youngest, and she chose me to be her person to take care of her through her death. So I it, I recognize that as an incredible honor, that to be chosen to be that person. It is a real sign of love and trust. Um, we might go into the task kicking and screaming, but hopefully in the end we do it as gracefully as possible. And I know for me, I when I think of the poaha, it does give me comfort as I think about my loved ones' deaths and my own death coming. And 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 I know that we need to figure out how to hold that space for everybody, for ourselves, our loved ones, everybody, because as you said, Hannah, we can't escape the exit. Um, we and if we fill in that space, there's no air to move. Without
Hmm.
air movement, we're not breathing. Without breath, there's no life. And life does mean death. The two are inextricably connected. And so again, I'm back to being aware, being present, and just just listening, just listening.
Poem, I liked what you said about your kupuna, your elder saying healing isn't the absence of death. Yeah. And you really bring forward that duality that we live with in life. As there is light, there is darkness. As there is life, there is death. As there is a heaven, there is earth below.
Mm.
This duality is something that um, also carries over for me personally, um, in thinking about my in the future, my future time when I, as we say, hala, as we pass away, that I I would want mm, my death to be a happy one, and one that I will have like spent the time preparing my family, teaching them the ceremonies, the rituals, and and we already discussed these things already, just openly, and which is wonderful, and the being able to take the stress off of them, take the decision making off of them, and let them know this is what I would like, and within my power, I'll do all my preparations now to make that easy for you, so that you can care for the body in the way that our ancestors did. Um, So for me, an ideal, not perfect, but perhaps an ideal death is actually preparing now while I'm living, prepare those who will survive me for that ceremony, for those things that they will be doing. I want them to say, ke hele ala oe e ho'o maha oe. Ke hele ala oe e ho'o maha oe. Ke hele ala oe e ho'o maha oe. Meaning to say, you are departing, Keoki. Go rest yourself. Do not make yourself a burden to us. Release and go. E hele ala oe, e ho'o maha oe. And as soon as they say that in my spirit form, however that may be, in hearing those words, ke hele ala oe e Keoki, go, then I will go. And I will walk to the Lena. I will walk to that leaping off point. I will meet my guardians, or I will meet my ancestors. They will walk with me. I will walk with them hand in hand, all the way into the spirit world. So, um, I think a part of what Hannah and Poem you're talking about is that communication and that preparation, and letting them know what needs to be done. And I also think of just in talking about hala, talking about death, um, that we shape their perspective now on what hala, what death and passing looks like, so that their grief is much easier to bear um, after our passing. So I know, Hannah, you talked about one side of your family being reluctant to talk about death, and I can only imagine that the grief and pain of the experience is magnified somewhat in
Mm-hmm.
comparison to the other side of your family that actually embraces it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so um in our it's my belief that we can create tradition. We can create traditions for ourselves, even if it's like reshaping and teaching our next generation of youth, young parents, that death is, like you said, Poem, a part of life. It is part of healing. It is part of our journey, and one that is something that we look forward to. I look forward to. We should look forward to.
Thank you to all of you for just sharing all of your thoughts and your knowledge with all of us here today. And I just keep thinking what an honor and a privilege it is to support and serve our own and those beyond. and how fortunate it is for us to be here and to continue all this work. And I really just want to say a mahalo to the three of you and give you a chance if there is anything else that the three of you would like to share with our audience before we close today.
I just wanted to say yet again, what an honor it is to be able to speak, to have been invited to speak, and to be part of this particular panel. I feel like I've learned so much. My heart feels opened. I thank you all very much, and Poki, thank you for your wonderful questions and holding us in this conversation.
I want to say mahalo. Mahalo nui ia o ko pakahi no kia manawa. No ka kama ili o ki kahi e pili ana ka hala ana a moe ana mahopi pono o ke ia noho ana. He mea nui e ao aku i nā i ka poʻo haole. He mea nui e ao aku i nā keiki ka o pio nā mākua. He mea nui e ao aku i nā kupuna mi ke mau mea e pili ana ka hala ana. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo nui loa no ke manawa. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. And just wanted to say that this has been a wonderful conversation, and in that it has brought us to understanding how important it is to teach our next generation, how important it is to teach and remind our elders that it is okay, you know, to practice our practices and to find that balance that is best for them. So my gratitude to you, Poa, my gratitude to you, Hannah, and to you, Poki'i, for guiding us today.
Yeah, I'd like to say masapar, ahiahat, thank you for allowing me to share my customs and traditions and personal experiences with you all. And I thank you for letting me talk about my grandmother as well, because I think in that way she lives on. And becoming an ancestor is something to be celebrated and something I also very much look forward to. And thank you, Keoki and Paul, using my elders. And thank you so much for allowing me to share space with you all. I don't quite think I know a lot, but I think I know enough. But besides that, thank you all, and thank you for your thoughtful questions, Poki'i, and of course to the folks that completed Life Initiative events for seeking us and bringing us all together. I think everything happens for a reason. Nothing is by mistake. So I think that we're all meant to be here today and share these experiences, and I hope it brings healing and medicine to the people that listen. Thank you.
Mahalo to everyone who was joining us. I think I will, and there was something that Hannah had spoke about, all three spoke about, is that speaking about it, saying the names of our elders, saying the names of our people, our customs, it is life. It brings it to life. It continues it. And that's what we are here to do today. And so mahalo, mahalo, mahalo to Completed Life, to Sarah, to Ali, to Keoki, to Hannah, to Plum, and to all of you who joined us today. Just to everyone, have a wonderful day.